Welcome to the Clean Power Brief. We are here with Divya Desai, the Executive Director of the Energy Co-op. So Divya, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure
Really
thing.
excited for this conversation.
Yeah, me too.
So for anybody listening who may not be familiar with you or the Energy Co-op, I'd love to start with your story and then move into the organization, clean energy landscape overall,
Yeah.
some of the bigger questions around leadership, culture, PJM, AI, and some of the other stuff we had touched on in our first conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I could just ask you to talk about your personal path.
Sure.
What brought you to where you are today with the co-op?
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the few things I don't love talking about, but I would I'd love to talk about it today. I know I mean
Sure.
it's been an interesting sort of path and journey here. Um
Right.
I've always cared about the environment and our impact. Sort of our impact as people on the planet. I think, even when I was a little kid, it's something that just always meant something to me. And I don't think I always knew how to channel that interest and that sort of
Mm,
passion for the environment. Um, when I was in my bachelor's, I was on the track for law school, and also post
right.
bachelor's. I started studying for my LSATs, doing the whole thing, and
Yeah.
I was particularly interested in environmental law. I sort of saw law as a vehicle to have positive impact on the environment. And so
Yeah.
despite focusing on law as a function or as a career, the environmental aspect was really important even then. Um, and
Hmm.
then I think, after I took my LSATs and I was working at a law firm, I sort of realized that law really wasn't the right approach for me to be involved in social impact in the way that I really wanted to be. I wanted to be an operator. And
Right.
so I pivoted to the nonprofit sector. I got my master's. The way I pivoted was I got my master's. And focused on studying organizational capacity building, particularly through fiscal responsibility, fiscal sustainability in social impact
Hmm.
organizations. It's something that has been deeply important to me since sort of my foray into the nonprofit world. And prior to the Energy Co-op, I was focused on education as sort of a mission, and also organizational capacity building as a mission.
Right.
So then, fast forward quite a few years later, probably 6 years later, I was sort of
Hmm.
ready to really shift my career into environmental work, really like dig my hands in. And that's where the Energy Co-op comes in. I was looking for something. I was really keen on moving back to Philadelphia. Um, and, the Energy Co-op's focus on renewable energy progress. And the way we actually achieve that through the cooperative business model was really, really
Yeah.
compelling to me. We
Yeah.
have and I have a soft spot for Philly in my heart, so there's a little bit of that. But really, it was
Who
finding the
doesn't?
energy. Yeah, right. Yeah. But really,
Yeah.
just the way that this sort of the way we achieve our mission through this cooperative business model was incredibly compelling to me. And yeah, and that's what brought me
Yeah.
here.
No, that's really interesting. So for listeners who may not know the Energy Co-op, how would you describe the organization to someone who's not familiar with it at all?
Yeah, yeah. I love this question.
Sure.
I think so at its very core, the Energy Co-op is a what we like to call a commerce and a cause. We are a retail energy supplier.
Hmm.
And for those folks that don't quite know what that means, the Energy Co-op, is Pennsylvania is a deregulated energy market, both for electric and gas. We sell renewable electricity to consumers that want to choose us. It's a competitive market, and we are a player in that market. So we sell renewable energy.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And deregulated versus regulated, can you just speak to that for a quick second for folks?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Back in the 90s, the electricity markets were deregulated. And what that means is typically in sort of the utility and energy distribution space, prior to deregulation, energy generation, um, energy generation, transmission, and distribution were vertically integrated. So
Right.
utilities would sort of own everything. And fast forward to deregulated markets, it happened kind of piecemeal, and not every state, not every market's deregulated, but a deregulated market separates distribution from generation. And
Right.
basically, in deregulated markets, typically distribution is typically utilities cannot own generation. And so it creates a competitive market for the generation space, which we call supply, but similar thing. We are not, just to be clear, we are not generators,
Right.
but we are a third party supplier that sells generation.
Right.
Yeah,
And that's perfect because you had mentioned in our first conversation that you described the energy co-op as being a revenue generating nonprofit.
sure.
So
Yeah.
why is that model important? Let's talk about that for a sec.
Yeah, this might be my favorite thing to talk about when it comes to the energy
Okay.
co-op. It is something really special. So I think our model is really key to why the energy co-op is in a unique position to affect real change.
Mhm.
For a little bit of context for listeners, the
Yeah.
energy co-op is a 501(c)(12) cooperative organization. Um, and we're a PAPUC licensed retail supplier. As I mentioned, that's sort of the function we play. We sell renewable electricity, renewable natural gas,
Mhm.
in sort of the southeastern Pennsylvania region. And what this kind of boils down to is we earn our income because we sell renewable energy. We earn our income as opposed to raising it like a charitable organization.
Right.
As a cooperative, sort of the important piece here is the cooperative aspect. As a cooperative, we are democratically owned by our members. It's one member, one vote. And we
Mm.
you know we it's really important that we serve our members' collective interests. That's
Right.
sort of the key to what we don't sort of serve shareholders or some sort of private interests. There is an
Mhm.
expectation that we don't operate to an excessive profit, or that we need to
Right.
be able to justify larger profits for mission progress. Um, I think
Okay.
if I could, I'll sort of add a little color here,
Yeah,
if that'd be
please.
helpful.
Please.
I think like when I zoom out and think about sort of my journey in the charitable space prior to the energy co-op, that third sector organizations, and I'm kind of specifically referring to 501(c)(3) organizations are pretty
Mhm.
notorious for being at the whims of donors and grant makers, and really often struggle with program stability and impact progress because of funding volatility. Um,
Right.
and these organizations also end up being kind of held to sort of unreasonable standards and limitations. For example, dedicating like not being able to dedicate adequate resources to general operations, which general operations are really critical for mission success. And sort of a lot of times people look at those things as, if you're not dedicating funds to programs, then it's not really having impact. And that's just not true.
Right.
I think that there's sort of this, and then on the flip side, on the private sector, like in the private sector, they're often
Yeah.
like private sector entities often lack the incentives or maybe the latitude from profit interests to sort of invest in social impact despite having the financial means. It's sort of the opposite, not quite,
Right.
but the opposite. It's
Right.
certainly not always the case. And I think it would be, unfair to say that that's like a blanket statement or as a blanket statement. And plenty of private companies do really dedicate resources to social impact.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, but it's not par for the course, I think. And that's sort of, so what's unique about what we do is, as I said, we're a commerce and a cause, and we generate revenue through our programs, and those
Mhm.
programs themselves are in direct service of the mission, because the whole point is we're selling renewable energy to affect renewable energy progress,
Right. Right.
and then
Yeah.
we take all of the any profits we make, we reinvest them in our mission work, whether it's education. Um, Furtherance of renewable energy progress in Pennsylvania, advocacy, lots of things. And we sort of, we take pride in being a sophisticated operation, but being able to do that, we earn our revenue, but we have the
Right.
autonomy to dedicate reasonable resources to improving how we operate, and then really thinking about mission impact in the broader scheme of things.
Yeah, because you made the point in our first conversation that nonprofits don't have to operate from a place of scarcity,
Hmm.
and it seems like you've really made that, you know, part of your mission so that there's a real sustainability to what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I truthfully can't take credit for that. The model existed before I got
Well, we'll
here,
do it
and
here anyway. We'll do it here.
yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really incredible model for effective change.
Right.
We we generate revenue. We sell a product, we generate revenue. It's because it's earned income, because it's distributed, we have a portfolio that we sort of sell across. We're able to really see stability, fiscal stability that allows us
Mhm.
to then make long-term decisions on how we're going to invest money, how we're going to, serve the mission ultimately. And there we can really think long-term. Even though in the
Right.
energy space that's difficult for other reasons, at least from an organizational standpoint, we
Yeah.
can do that.
So I wanted to quickly touch on leadership because that came up in our first conversation before we get on to some of the stuff, with PJM and other items.
Mhm.
Because you had said that culture and impact are not separate, that they're connected. Can you just unpack that a little bit, for our
Yeah.
listeners? Your view of that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I do agree with that. Um I think this kind of goes back to a similar point I was making earlier with
Mhm.
the way organizations think about sort of, or rather, maybe funders think about dedicating funds. When you look at, you know, mission-driven work can often be really complex and intense. But it can
Yeah.
also be really thankless. It can be constrained by limited resources. It can be
Mhm.
really emotionally taxing. It's not work for the weak. And I'm just awed by some of the people that do the work we do, whether it's
Yeah.
here at the organization, um, in the clean energy space, more broadly in sort of social impact work. It really requires progress over time, building a depth of knowledge, creating a collaborative network,
Mhm.
real meaningful relationships, and sort of, you know, I guess, like, the stomach to fail and sort of still show up the next day,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
show up even more determined.
Yeah.
In my experience, the most valuable, the most impactful asset or resource an organization can have, to make real progress in the work that we do are the
Mhm.
people that show up for the mission. People achieve
Absolutely.
missions. Yeah, people care enough to make a difference. That's really sort of the foundation of it all. And it sort of only follows that the most important investment leadership can make towards mission progress is sort of in the team culture, and to
Right.
me, sort of a team culture that's founded in trust, in growth and balance is really, really critical. I think like a staff that can sort of trust leadership, trust their teammates, trust the organization as a whole,
Mhm.
is going to feel more connected to the organization, feel more connected to the mission, and sort of more comfortable. Will feel more comfortable having constructive conversations. Team members that feel supported, that have opportunities for meaningful
Right.
growth at an organization. Opportunities for
Critical.
professional.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so critical.
Yeah.
And
It is.
it's sort of. It's more often than not staff that feel like they have all of that are sort of likely to develop a greater sense of ownership over the mission work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
that ownership is, I think, it, people talk about startups and equity, and like I think the sort of the investing in team culture is to me
uh-huh.
in some ways equivalent to equity. It's not the
Yeah,
same. There's a financial return on equity,
of
but
course,
there's
yeah,
a social return on culture and social impact. And sort of investing in that, investing in your team in that way, to me feels like it creates this return for our team members that really makes a big
right.
difference. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I totally agree. I mean, it's well documented. People wanna understand where the organization's going, what the mission is. They wanna really have that sense of ownership and also, understand the progress that the organization's making, their part in that. So, yeah, I totally agree. I love what you're saying there.
yeah,
One of the things, talking about leadership I wonder from your perspective, what kind of conversations do you wish that more leaders were having with each other? Because
Mhm.
we're noticing this sort of ecosystem being built here, right?
Yeah.
So in your view, what are those conversations that you wish more leaders were having with each other?
Yeah, that's such a great question.
Thank you.
I'm gonna have to think about that for a second. I mean, I think that I think that there's something to sort of, we talked a little bit about when in our first conversation, we talked a little bit about sort of um, leadership feeling lonely. I think you called it,
Right.
the lonely island of leadership is maybe the term you used, and there
Yeah.
is something to that. I think this, I'll say that that in particular hits maybe a little bit of a not a nerve, but it hits something for me.
Right.
And I think you know. I won't. I'll start more broadly and maybe bring it into the clean energy space because there are some
Hmm.
real challenges we're dealing with.
Yeah.
But I think more broadly, I think I would love to be having more conversations with leaders about sort of um, what's working. I specifically believe in deeply investing in the team
Hmm.
to really get buy-in and have sort of transparent leadership style, and all of that is really important to me. I'm not really, but that doesn't mean that I can't learn from others on that front. And
Right.
there's always something new. I think particularly sort of talking to leaders about like what is working. Often it's easy to hear about what doesn't work. You hear a lot about things that
Right.
blow up or things
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
aren't
Of
working
course.
because of X, Y, and Z, or you hear about like a really bad situation. And, you know, it's unfortunate. It's like the restaurant review. You hear really bad reviews. You often get really bad reviews, but you don't always get the 5 star. And so like I would love to be having more generative conversations, with
I
leaders
like that.
about what is working, and why.
Yeah.
Why is it working? How did you get there?
Yeah.
Those are really important. I'd love
Well, I
to
mean,
yeah. Mhm.
I'm sorry.
No, no,
Go
please.
ahead. No, just with especially with some of the headwinds that the industry is facing right now, it's still progressing forward, right? So
Yes.
clearly there are things that are working that folks are doing that should be lessons shared with each other. So
Yes.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd love to shift a little bit right now,
Sure.
if we could. So you brought up PJM and the
Mhm.
pressure that the grid is under. For listeners who are sort of not deep into the energy markets, how would you explain what's happening from a high level from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try and keep this as brief as I can. So much is really happening broadly in energy and more specifically in clean energy.
Hmm.
We face a few key energy challenges as a society. So domestically, we have an aging grid. Infrastructure requires a lot of deep investment for modernization. And a lot of the infrastructure that we have is not really conducive to sort of clean energy or distributed interconnection. Um, there's a lack of what I would consider appropriate incentives to drive clean energy development. And we're facing pretty severe energy market volatility and disruption at home due to conflicts that are happening halfway around the world, anywhere around the world. There's sort of that feeling that there's really not a lot of market protection. Um, you mentioned PJM. In PJM specifically, so much is happening. For folks that don't know, PJM is the largest grid operator in the country. Um, we PJM as a region are facing sort of the possibility of demand outpacing supply. It doesn't sound crazy, but it is crazy, and we're at this inflection point. You work pretty deeply in AI. The AI boom and electrification kind of paired together are driving a lot of the demand that is now seeing forecasts where demand outpaces supply pretty substantially. The projections are evolving, and but there's really no doubt that energy demand is sort of growing at a faster pace than supply.
Mhm.
Again, in PJM, I don't know, for some people might be familiar, but there was an interconnection freeze for a number of years. There were projects that
Big
were sort
deal.
of in the interconnection queue the queue was frozen because of the administrative burden, for sort of an influx of projects.
Right.
And that has
And that's
really
not just PJM. I mean, that's
sure.
obviously happened all over the nation, but yeah,
Fair
absolutely.
point. Fair point. That has happened.
Huge.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are just so many energy projects that are trying to come online, and interconnection. Um, uh, the slowing of interconnection has been a real problem, and so it's considerably slowed supply growth. And that kind of brings me sort of to another point on PJM, which is
Mhm.
PJM really has sort of outdated regulatory structures, that can't really keep pace with an evolving industry. This is really, really important, and it very directly affects consumers.
Mm.
If you what's a good example? If you take the PJM capacity auction, uh, so
Right.
the capacity auction is a market design that allows for, sort of rate setting and capacity rate setting. That market design,
Except just pause on that for a sec, just to
sure,
so people understand that
yeah,
mechanism a little bit more. Just you have to go into crazy detail, but just
sure.
for some people may not know that market.
Yeah, it's so the I can't pretend I'm like an expert on capacity markets, but essentially there's an auction, and all
Mhm.
of the sort of generation resources are involved in the capacity auction, and at the end of it, the sort of the result of the auction will set capacity costs for
Right.
all suppliers, all utilities, and that's across the board for the entire PJM region.
Right.
To sort of put it into context, I'll sort of put it into context for our organization because it's different across each organization. But prior to the 2024 capacity auction, um, our capacity costs were a certain figure. Following the most, not the last capacity auction, but the one before,
Mhm.
the what ended up happening was, and I'll talk about sort of what this means, but the capacity auction results ended in the energy co-op's capacity costs, um, quadrupling. And we're talking about,
Was it really? Wow.
yes, quadrupling. And
Wow.
we're not the only ones that experience things like that. And, we are a boutique retail supplier. We're talking
Mhm.
about, in the scheme of things, kind of small peanuts. If you look and, so
Yeah.
and we're, people elect to purchase from us. We're a premium product. But when you zoom out to what that means for utilities, the scale of that and sort of the impact on consumers who don't have a choice, who sort of are default need to be with the utility for either support programs or things like that. There's no control, and I think this is
Right.
it's a market design that ultimately bolsters legacy power generation, so fossil fuels primarily, and
Yeah.
it does not incentivize infrastructure development. It also, quite frankly, disregards the energy consumer, and it essentially the 24 auction was an example. It results in sort of
Mhm.
severe cost increases to the consumer, which is scary. As a
Yeah.
consumer, you
That
can't
they have no
really.
control over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's definitely some challenges, and there are, so many flaws and, disjointed approaches when you look across the nation. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just one market to the next is so different. So I guess, to look at it from a different perspective that you brought up earlier, what gives you hope?
Yeah. Um, I think there's so many things. Quite frankly, despite the sort of the challenges we face,
Mhm.
I think what gives me hope, what sort of keeps me optimistic, is clean energy's potential to solve global challenges.
Mm.
We didn't really get into the global nature of like the some of the sort of global challenges,
Yeah.
in energy and clean energy. But a lot of folks are sort of plugged into that. I'm not sure it's going to be particularly new information. Um, but I think
Bring
like.
it.
Yeah, a lot has to change. I think the markets
Right.
need to incentivize progress, and also incentivize cost reduction. We can't be focused on entrenched interests in the way that sort of the industry now is. Clean energy needs to be sort of separated from um, political discourse, if you will. There's sort of a
Yeah.
politicization of clean energy. There's also, misinformation can't be allowed or encouraged, as it has been in the current, federal administration. And I think ultimately clean energy needs to be designed and implemented in a way that achieves energy justice, sort of in sharp contrast to how fossil fuels have impacted, our society historically, and sort of
Yeah.
disproportionately impacted disadvantaged communities. I think so that's also say a lot has to change. But I think that what really gives me optimism is that is a few things. There's so many incredible people in the space, that really
Yes.
care about the work that's being done. It all boils down to people, in my opinion, and sort of, it's as a collective, there's really a lot we can do. Um, and so I think, yeah, I think that collective action is really important, and gives me a lot of hope because, again, people make a
Yeah.
difference. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen some collective action in this nation over the past,
Yeah.
we'll just say set period of time
Yeah.
to keep it very, very general. But yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
hearing that from a lot of folks, depoliticize the conversation because
Yes.
it should not be so politicized,
Yeah.
and there shouldn't be, people on other sides going at each other about energy. It should be
Yeah.
the cleanest, least expensive, easiest to get to people. Share it with everybody.
Yes.
Make it just with everyone. So
That's exactly right. That's exactly
yeah, no,
right.
I think we're on the same page there. And there's a lot of people. I
Yeah.
think most people are on that page.
Sure.
They just tend not to always be the loudest voices, so hopefully this will help to get some of those voices out there.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's one idea from today's conversation that you hope that listeners are gonna carry with them?
I really I wish people really understood and believed in the value and the power of collective action, the value of even
Right,
one incremental person. We talk about it with voting, with the elections, and sort of, in our space, obviously voting, being a part of doing your civic duty, being a part of the election process, the voting process is really important to drive clean energy agendas, that we
right,
believe in. But when we come into our space, we're revenue generating. We talk about voting with our dollars, and so the same sort
right.
of, the same sort of philosophy applies. The cooperatives are built on the belief that collective action is stronger, than individuals. But the
Bingo.
fact is, the individual is a part of the collective, and each person's choice matters. Every person, every company that chooses clean energy over dirty power today, is working towards clean energy demand, clean energy progress. And so it's really up to every
Love it.
single person to speak up, to vote, to advocate, take action, make a difference. It's just, there there is
Love it.
no better, there's nothing more valuable than, I think, the person sort of, showing up for the mission.
Fair
So
enough. Love it.
yeah.
So, what are you most focused on for the next chapter
Mm,
of the energy co-op? What's next?
yeah. Um, that's kind of an easy one. I mean, I'd love to sit here and talk to you all day about what we're working on and what we're excited
Mhm.
about. We have a really, really enthusiastic team, which is just such a blessing. And
Mhm.
we're really passionate about the things we do. I think that, when we sort of a few years ago, we implemented a strategic plan, and we're in the midst of that strategic plan.
Right,
And
you had mentioned that.
yeah, yeah, and strategic planning is tough. Things change, and the space has changed
Yeah,
so dramatically, and so we have to kind of, dive and duck to come what may. But uh, the one thing that hasn't changed is our desire to bring additionality,
right.
to be a driver of additionality. And just to would it be helpful to kind of just talk about additionality for a second?
Sure, yeah,
Okay.
please.
Additionality is essentially net new clean energy generation that is interconnected
Right.
to the grid. So, you know, purchasing from the energy co-op, while in my opinion, a positive thing. It does
Of
not
course.
actually it does not actually drive additionality. We are not adding new generation to the grid by doing that in the truest form. We're driving renewable energy, clean energy demand, and that's
Mhm.
really important to sort of tip the scales. When we sort
Right.
of get back into that collective action, but net new generation is really really critical for like substantive clean energy progress. And so,
Right.
when we sort of zoom out and to look at what are we bringing to the table? I mentioned that I believe the Energy Cop is in a really unique position to affect change, real change, because of our model, because of how passionate we are. This is it to me. The sort
Mhm.
of the ability to say, how are we taking our model? How are we taking our members' passion, their commitment to us? How are we taking our staff, our board's commitment to what we're doing, and drive that into actually, creating additionality in PJM,
Right.
and in the broader space, but PJM because we operate here. So I think that's kind of where we are.
So where can people learn more about the energy co-op or get involved?
Yeah, yeah. The Energy Co-op is a local Philadelphia-based retail renewable energy supplier. Like I said,
Mhm.
we're based in Philadelphia, so you can come visit us if you want in Center City. But you
You
can
heard
learn
it,
more.
guys. Hop on in.
But we welcome visitors.
Free coffee.
That's right. But you can visit us at our website. It's
Okay.
www.theenergy.coop. You can also give us a call. One thing we really pride ourselves on is being an organization where you can actually contact us. You can talk
Nice.
to our team. We have the most incredible membership team, and they'll answer the phones and sort of talk to you about what we do. Um, that our phone number is 215-413-2122. And you can also see us on social media. You can friend us. You can chat with us on social media. We're the Energy co-op on Facebook and LinkedIn, and we're also the energy.coop on Instagram. So
Nice.
yeah.
Love it. Well,
Well,
Divya, this has really been excellent. I very much appreciate your time. I think this was some really, really valuable content for folks, and
yeah.
really looking forward to having further conversations with you.
Me
So
too.
thank you again for joining us, and we'll sign off from here.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Patrick. It was lovely.
All right. Thank you. Take care.